with that, I would like to hand it over to Steve. Steve?
Hey, thank you, Pam. Thanks for having me today. A little bit about my company, the SI organization. As Pam mentioned, we did go through a divestiture back in 2010, where we broke away from Lockheed Martin due to government policy changes around the organizational conflict of interest. But we've been a full lifecycle provider of system engineering and integration services to the U.S. intelligence community primarily, but also to Department of Defense and several other agencies as well, and also doing a lot of more commercial activity these days, which drives a lot of the need for mobility, which I'll get into in great detail. We have a 40-year history. We're the original system integrator for the intelligence community way back when, and we also do a lot of modeling and simulation for them as well. We're about 2,000 employees, and we probably have about 1,100 partners that also have access to our systems, just to set the context for the discussion. Today I'll move through why did I look at BYOD outside of the trends that we're seeing in industry, some of the financial benefits that I saw, go through my key objectives and requirements that drove my product selection, a bit about my approach to selecting a product and implementing it. We'll run through an overview of the LetMobile solution which we selected, get into a bit of a comparison of the other types of mobile security solutions out there and the pros and cons from my perspective. I'll also run you through some of the key design decisions that we made that drove this configuration of our product. And I'll be upfront, some of those configuration decisions drive usability as well, for instance, like a pin on a device. So that'll feed into a bit about the user feedback that we'll see at the end as well. Run you through some of the challenges and risks that we saw and how LetMobile met almost all of those and some of the lessons learned going forward. Then I'll hand it back over to Pam where she can run through a solution overview pending time, and then we'll get to as many questions as we can. So moving in, why did I even consider BYOD? And it was certainly mainly driven out of the need for productivity. With the emerging mobile employee, more employees need to access enterprise resources whenever and wherever they are, and the places that they are get more and more diverse. So driving affordability, I couldn't afford to issue corporate devices to all these employees who truly would benefit from these devices. So I had to figure out some avenue to securely enable folks to leverage their own devices to access the enterprise. A lot of it was driven by the wanting to leverage this whole consumerization of IT trend, where consumer devices are way leaps and bounds ahead of enterprise devices, and that's flipped over the years. It used to be where enterprise led consumer devices. It's very, very different now and rapidly moving. So to try to benefit from that, I had to look to BYOD. The last point would be also employee recruitment and retention. The next-gen employee is really, truly extremely connected, and their expectations coming into the enterprise are to be connected and to collaborate as they want to collaborate, which is very real time. So that definitely drives it more mobility as well. This whole mix in a company like mine, who's very defense-oriented, primarily government work, or at least 90% government work right now, it drives a whole new balance for us, trying to balance productivity and affordability in light of government sequestration and things like that, and underlying all of it is something we can't compromise, and that's the security of what we do. So I put together a notional model here of corporate savings, but it very much parallels my real numbers. I just, for sensitivity reasons, didn't want to show my real numbers here, but this will give you a live example of how we looked at what we could obtain from a savings perspective. So if you take a typical enterprise on the left with about 2,000 employees, which is our size, you assume that 60% of them are mobilely enabled, and maybe you want that to be even higher. you get about 1,200 devices in the enterprise. In the standard corporate model today, if you're paying $85 a month for a wireless plan, data and voice for that employee, it's about $1.2 million a year. There's two BYOD models that we looked at, and in the end I'll talk about it. We actually ended up in a hybrid, but you could choose to push everyone to BYOD and issue a $40 per user per month stipend. So you effectively more than half the cost to the enterprise. So your total annual costs are down in the $580K range now, and your savings is upwards of $650K. So you're still paying for the employee's use of that device, but they get to use it for personal reasons as well. And you know, one of the biggest things I see with BYOD is, or even corporate devices, is all devices are personal. Whether it's a personal device, they're doing work things on them now with cloud-based repositories like Dropbox and Google Voice and those kinds of things. I'm seeing it. So if I don't embrace it and try to do it securely, they're going to do it anyway, and we're more at risk from that perspective. And then even corporate devices, no matter what policy we have out there, folks are doing personal things on the corporate devices as well, because they have them with them all the time, and it's a convenience thing, it's a work-life balance thing that they have to you know, be attached to work. They're going to do both on the device, so that drives us at BYOD as well. And then you could go BYOD with no stipend, which we're doing as well. So if you take just a notional estimate of $5 a month to do BYOD per employee, your savings or your cost would be about $72K per year, which yields an even greater savings of $1.16 million per year in this notional model. So significant savings can be had, and this is a very simple model and doesn't take into account all the cost of, say, your corporate platform right now is BlackBerry. You can reduce those operating costs, and even if you eliminate it, eliminate the licensing costs for the Exchange or enterprise server and that kind of thing as well. So in the end, we ended up in a hybrid model right now. We haven't forced folks to BYOD. We are allowing the senior tier of the corporation to continue on corporate devices, while the lower levels of employees are actually choosing to go to BYOD, but some are being moved to BYOD manually as well. So it's a hybrid of, we still are supporting corporate devices, but are moving the lower level employees to BYOD and then opening up BYOD to the rest of the corporation. So folks that couldn't get access to enterprise resources like email before are now able to. So we fully licensed it to open it up to the whole company. So my primary objective was to enable broader enterprise mobility while not increasing costs. I just couldn't afford to pay for more corporate devices. This talks to a lot of things on the couple charts ago of trying to leverage the consumer IT. All those devices are out there to get more productivity and actually enhance work-life balance. That's something I'm getting significant feedback on from folks that have jumped onto BYOD, is that their work-life balance is better now, where they had to stop what they were doing in their personal lives and go log in to do work or at least check something at work. They can now do it in their evening flow without really interrupting their lives. So I've gotten that on several fronts, that kind of good feedback. And another underlying goal was to reduce overhead costs where I could. So we are talking at executive levels about moving the whole company to BYOD and not supporting a corporate device anymore, but we haven't made those final decisions yet. Some of the underlying requirements for my deployment, data security was paramount, so minimizing the data that's stored on the mobile device was a key requirement for us. And coupled to that is minimizing risk to the personal device. And what I mean by that is mobile devices have flash memory in them. The way the mobile operating system handles flash is it doesn't truly erase the data on the flash. It just wipes pointers to it. So the data resides on the phone still, even though there's no pointers to it, and that's to minimize the wear and tear on flash memory, given if you overrode it all the time, you'd wear it out faster. That's important to us because we have sensitive data that we're using on other networks, and that data is in people's heads, and sometimes it gets onto our unclassified network, and that could get out to phones. And in that case, if the wrong kind of data got out to a phone, from the government's perspective, we have to destroy those devices because you can't truly wipe the data off the flash memory. Another reason is we have other unclassified but sensitive data that we want to keep from getting out to mobile devices. I needed a solution that would allow me to do some filtering, content filtering and masking where we could. The other big thing was ITAR regulations that I have, export control. I needed to be able to control where a mobile user could see certain kinds of data. So I needed a solution that allowed me to what they call geofence, where people could and couldn't access certain types of data. And lastly, and it was a huge requirement actually, is the user experience. Just from our heritage with Lockheed, I had some familiarity with their experience on a secure container solution where while secure, it really wasn't usable given the containerization, the way it separated that world from the rest of the device features, like being able to call out to a conference from your corporate calendar, and you end up with dual calendars. I'll get more into that later, but user experience, being able to use the phone as it was designed, the native apps on it was huge for us as well. So we did a lean trade study, I'll say, using some criteria versus criteria kind of comparison for mobile security products. I listed some of the criteria that we used, and certainly usability was part of one of these criteria. At the time, LetMobile, and this was summer of 2012 that we did the study, LetMobile was not part of that initial trade study. I wasn't aware of the product. It didn't show up in some of the analyst reports that I looked at and those kinds of things. And we did end up rating a secure container technology highest from a security perspective. But there was lots of underlying issues still. Usability wasn't there, and the costs for those solutions are significant as well, which was a big hurdle for us. Also, our government customer wasn't satisfied with that secure container approach either. I'll get more into that later when I talk about running the LetMobile solution by our government customer. But fundamentally, the secure container solutions encrypt the data at 256-bit encryption, and if we had a security spill, which the wrong data got out onto the phone, apparently that encryption strength wasn't strong enough, and they would still make us destroy phones. So that's why that solution still didn't meet our requirements, because it didn't satisfy our customers' requirements. So we did continue to explore security solutions, and that's where I discovered LetMobile actually through social media. We performed due diligence on them, lots of deep dive conversations with Jor and Pam and the LetMobile crew, lots of web research. We engaged Gartner's analysts on some face-to-face discussions, and out of all that, we elected to conduct a LetMobile proof of concept on site here. Quick look at the solutions, the different types of solutions that are out there, and this was based on a chart that LetMobile published, but I put my own spin on it, trying to rate it to when I was selling it internally here, trying to rate the solutions and help people understand where the strengths and weaknesses were. So this is my take on the market and where I thought some of the solutions panned out. So on the left, you have the different types of solutions from MDM, secure container, virtualization, and then a gateway approach, which is where LetMobile falls. Across the top, you have the different major criteria that we're looking at. So security being paramount, user experience being very important as well as the total cost of ownership. If we looked at MDM, bottom line, data still gets out onto the phone. The user does lose control of IT policy on the phone. They have to accept the corporate policy, which doesn't make them happy in their personal lives. And while the licensing costs of that solution might be low, the operating costs tended to be higher for that kind of solution. The secure container approach, similarly, data still gets out onto the phone, even though it's 256-bit encrypted. I explained from our perspective the issue our government customer had with data being on the phone still. I just couldn't assume responsibility in the event of a data spill to replace a person's personal phone. It was just not an affordable avenue for us. They definitely lose the user experience with a secure container approach because you get a whole different set of email, calendar applications on the phone, dual contact lists, different email apps, and the cost of a secure container approach tended to be a lot higher as well. Virtualization was another avenue for that. We didn't consider these as much. They were very high costs to get into that kind of solution. We do have a virtual desktop infrastructure deployed, but we weren't seeing that as usable on a small form factor like a phone. It's nice for a tablet kind of device, but not usable on a phone. It does secure the data well, though, because the data stays in the data center. And then lastly, the strength of LetMobile is really keeping the data off the phone, securing the data, not necessarily worrying about the device itself, and the user experience being able to use all the native applications on the phone, and then looking at the total cost of ownership. It was very beneficial for the enterprise. So continuing with the approach, as I said, we did decide to conduct the proof of concept with LetMobile. We determined a 60-day window would be appropriate. We chose to do an on-premise deployment of LetMobile, and that was, again, more driven by our security requirements and the need to control some of the data that we have from the government and those kinds of things. LetMobile does have a great cloud offering in a U.S. region of Amazon, EC2, but that was just our choice up front. We did start this pilot small with about 12 users. We did end up growing it to 32 users, and that probably would have grown even more if we could have. We were limited from a proof of concept licensing perspective, although I know Pam would have happily given us more licenses, but I'm kind of glad we limited it there. We did extend it to executives. I tell you what, the proof of concept went so well that in the first week, those 12 users, anyone that had a corporate device, put it down in the first week and solely used LetMobile. And then word spread quite virally, almost like we had a live production offering already. And I was wondering how folks were finding out about it. And then some executives approached me about getting on. So from a unique use case perspective, we did let a couple executives on, including our CEO. And the solution just really, really worked right out of the box once we got it set up. We then moved up forward and presented our implementation to our government customer, at least the largest government customer, but we followed through with all our major customers. They were really, really pleased with what they saw. They found it to be a very robust solution and actually commented that we were pioneers in the industry, and they didn't have, in our defense industry, they didn't have a lot of SIs approaching them about what they were doing with BYOD, even though some of them have moved out on it already as well. From there, we continued rigorous testing and eventually deployed it to production. We did a lot of our own security testing just to validate that the features that LetMobile said it had, that it was actually doing. And given we have some of the cyber experience in-house, we actually did some digital forensics on the phones as well to make sure that data was truly not where it shouldn't be. Another part of the deployment was pre-advertising that the capability was coming to the business and allowing early sign-up. So we were able to gather interest up front of even having the production solution out there. BYOD policy is another huge area that you must move out on. We developed our own BYOD policy, but you'll see the sub-bullet there shows you we actually leveraged some government guidance that was put out there, and I put the link in there for you. And that kind of jump-started us with a policy that we could more tailor to us versus having to think through everything. And the policy is extremely important given a lot of the liability and legal issues that are starting to emerge from companies using BYOD. So that's an extremely important part of the deployment process. Self-service is what LetMobile advertises, and that's how we've deployed it. We did supplement that with some additional documentation and frequently asked questions that were more specific to our business. So there's a one-stop shop for folks to get help. We did see a pretty rapid adoption. In fact, in the first month that I had BYOD live in the company, I had more BYOD users than corporate devices after that 1 month. So things are going well. Moving on to show you a little bit of the solution from an overview perspective. On the left is, at a very high level, the architecture that we've deployed. It's exactly what LetMobile recommends, with a little bit of additional security laid in where you see the firewalls and the intrusion detection. We have kind of sandwiched it there in our outside perimeter firewalls. LetMobile out of the box does provide encrypted database, so that's not something we did. That's out of the box with the solution. And like I said earlier, we did deploy it as an on-prem solution versus leveraging the cloud for now. Some of the features that LetMobile has that were important to us, certainly the secure email calendaring, tasking, and contacts. Big thing, no email stored on the phone itself. The native user experience. I was very pleased to find out LetMobile had thought through this data loss protection and content filtering extremely well. They have very powerful rule sets in there that you can configure and combine to do a myriad of filtering or protection that you might want to do. So they really thought through that part of the solution. Another one was the country-based geofencing, so that allows me to say where folks can and can't access data from, and that's not using the location services on the phone. It's actually using the IP that the request comes from, the IP of the phone that it comes from. So you can't defeat that as well. And then super important was the centralized management of all these devices, being able to control them centrally, as well as all the auditing that takes place and the reporting I can do on what devices are connected, what are not, which devices have done what. There's a lot of that kind of power in the console as well. The benefits, as I've been talking from my perspective, certainly was the data security, the approach of securing the data and not necessarily the device. We do look at BYOD devices as truly being untrusted devices. It allowed me to support, this solution allowed me to support BYOD in a secure way where I didn't think I was going to get there, especially with something that was approvable by my customer as well. Another advantage is I'm running it in parallel with corporate devices. So from an ActiveSync perspective, which is the underlying protocol that LetMobile takes advantage of, I'm able to support both corporate devices and BYOD devices with one mobile security solution. And that was powerful for me as well. As we've talked, no third-party email apps. You use the native apps on the phone. It's allowing a lot of folks to carry one device instead where they were carrying a personal device and a corporate device in the past. We're still seeing folks turning in their corporate devices, choosing BYOD a lot because of that. They want their phone, their experience, and not having to carry two phones. The other big advantage that LetMobile provides is being able to use this across many devices, and their licensing approach is very beneficial that way too. They license by user, not by device, So me as a user can have multiple devices, like I have a phone and a tablet both connected, but I only need one license for that, so that was a big advantage. Device privacy is another big thing that pops up in the BYOD world, and LetMobile's thought through that as well. The only information they know about a phone is its location, like I said, by IP address that it's requesting from. They cannot see into personal activity on the phone, and this is still a cultural thing that we're having to deal with in the business to help explain that we're not monitoring your phone. We can't even see what's going on the phone outside of your business activity. And then lastly, the total cost of ownership was very beneficial for LetMobile. I did mention deployment options. LetMobile has a cloud-based solution in Amazon EC2, and they do provide for an on-premise deployment mechanism as well. So some of the design decisions that we made along the way, LetMobile supports more than these OSs that I've listed, but we chose to draw a line at iOS 5X from a SWORT perspective, mainly because the carriers are pushing at least that to phones, and all the phones that came to us were above 5X and very supportable. So that's where we draw the line for that. We also draw a line at Android 4.x, although LetMobile supports back to 2.x. We saw some intermittent issues with a couple 2.x phones that we had, so we decided to draw the line at 4.x, which is most and above, which is mostly what all the phones we're seeing coming in at. We decided to deny access to Windows Phone and Windows 8 devices at this time. LetMobile does support these devices in a hybrid mode, which doesn't fully keep the data off the device. So at this point, we're going to not allow Windows phones to join BYOD, and they do not support BlackBerry at all. And it wasn't a big deal. We're not looking to support BlackBerries going forward. We also configured a lot of the LetMobile security policy to filter on certain content. So we have this sensitive but unclassified data called FOUO that we just flat out prevent from getting to the phone. So we have some rules set up to not allow the user to get access to that data when they're mobile. They do get an email in their inbox, though, that says that the content was filtered by LetMobile, so they at least have a heads up that they got something that they can't see on the device. Similarly, with the disallowing access from outside the United States, we set that as a policy by default. We have a waiver process in case someone needs to go international and is approved to take their electronic device. It just kind of forces that check, and it's just important for us. I mean, we could lose contracts if we have export control compliance issues. So moving on to challenges and risks, some of the biggest challenges are these employee concerns, valid or not. One of them, and it wasn't pervasive by any means, but we did have a couple employees that didn't have smartphones at this time, and it wasn't something that we thought through up front that would be very pervasive. And it's not. We only had a couple, but it is coming to light. The other bigger one, and it was mostly out of our business development organization, was the voice plan. So a lot of folks don't carry hefty voice plans on their personal devices. And we found just for these few business development folks that use their phones, use their voice on the phones significantly, their personal plans were insufficient to cover that. The last concern was privacy, as I talked earlier, and I think LetMobile really scratches the itch there, and it's just an education thing that we need to do for the enterprise. The second big challenge is if you're keeping the data off the device, and LetMobile does allow you to go in different modes. You can actually allow data down to the device if you want, like we do personally for our corporate phones. If you're keeping data off the device, you need to have pervasive mobile connectivity, and in some of our office spaces, we don't have good broadband connectivity or signals in those areas, and that created some hurdles. But once they understand what's going on, then it was okay. There were also some subtleties in setting up Android you know, given the diverse nature of all the Android platforms and how different vendors are taking the operating system, we are seeing some subtleties in setup. We've been working closely with LetMobile. They've been a great partner to update sign-up screens to get the instructions more robust so that Android flies through as self-service as well and doesn't need hand-holding, which is the desire. In general, another concern was the shift to the self-service model. While, you know, the younger generation expects that, you know, some employees still like the hand-holding, still like to talk to a voice. So we're working through that cultural shift of moving to a self-service model for LetMobile. And it's going really well. I mean, we've even had, you know, executive tiers jump right in and set up their iOS devices without any issues. Some of the biggest risks that we looked at going into this, certainly are compliance with government policy around certain types of data, but you might have others like HIPAA and those kinds of things that you need to be compliant with. Data loss was a huge concern as well if a device is lost or stolen. So not having the data on the device again was important there. Also, what some of the third-party apps on phones might be doing with this data. Everything is so connected now. Applications don't necessarily ask you for access to data on that device, so another important part of keeping data off the device and controlling copy and paste and things like that LetMobile does. I talked about flash memory earlier and how it's not easily erased, so that was another risk that we've mitigated with LetMobile. And then I talked about some of the liability issues that are popping up around BYOD, so be sure to get involved and have a policy for BYOD. Moving into some of the lessons learned, definitely things that worked well. The product right out of the box. It really, really works so well. As I mentioned, several folks just put down their corporate device in the first week and didn't miss a beat. The other thing, the self-service model works really well. For iOS, it was seamless. And for Android, like I mentioned, there was just some setup subtleties between different versions of Android that if it was a certain version, you just had to do one more step or a step a different way. It was subtle, but it was enough to have some of the Android users stumbled. So like I said, LetMobile attacked that one and updated their setup screens, and we're moving along. Support from LetMobile was fantastic. Their staff's extremely knowledgeable and engaged, and communications were exceptional. Running the proof of concept, absolutely would highly recommend doing that again. It's even easier if you leverage LetMobile's cloud solution to jump on a POC very quickly. It allowed us to engage a good cross-section of business and really run some diverse use cases that we might not have thought of through the solution. It also helped us refine the general configuration of the gateway as well as our security policies, like authentication timeout, for instance. So you authenticate to LetMobile Gateway, you can configure how long that authentication is good for, and we time it out after 20 minutes of inactivity, and you might choose to do an hour, but it really helped us refine those kind of policies. Lastly, the LetMobile has been very open to feedback on the product and enhancements, and have incorporated some of our enhancement requests already, and have some more slated for the fall releases. So they've been a great partner to work with and very open to improving the product. Things that we saw as potentially could be improved, our on-premise deployment planning wasn't as formal as we should have been with it, and in standing up the LetMobile Gateway on site, and it needed some documentation updates too, so LetMobile's working those. I think if we did it again, we would limit the proof of concept users to a lot less than 32. All those users, especially when you get a senior tier of your organization on the solution, expect it to just transition data and all right to production. instead of going down for any period of time to come back up as production. So we were able to pull that off. It just required a little more effort to make sure that the proof of concept data, that it didn't miss a beat going to production. And then lastly, I talked about the Android devices enough. That's been kind of addressed now. So lastly, I have some user feedback, some candid feedback that we've picked up from users along the way. They definitely like how easy and convenient the solution is. It's so easy to make sure something's not on fire at work, where they used to have to really break their lives to go check that in the past. So not only is it enhancing their work-life balance, but they're more productive that way as well. So it's definitely making it easier to stay connected and weave into their personal lives. And that's what we've seen for years, where work and personal intermix these days, and there's no real line between them. This definitely makes it easier. They like using their own device of choice instead of having a device dictated by the corporation. Has to do with that native stuff that they're familiar with on the phone. They like that this solution supports many different devices and operating systems, and we look forward from a corporate perspective here to full support for the Windows platform as soon as that's truly a viable platform. And then the fact that it doesn't really impact their data plans. It's like a blip, corporate data on their personal data plan, so there's really no impact to that. I will talk to the voice side of it, or talk to that before. That's the only area we saw a couple users that are heavy voice users impacted. But generally what we see is folks use data, and that's what they need data for, or that's what they need mobile devices for. So some of the dislikes on iOS in particular, and I think this is an operating system limitation for LetMobile to deal with. You have to leave the email application to log into LetMobile and then go back to the email application to view messages. And then you just continue in the email application. It's just an extra step. It's not a big deal, but it's a little nit that we did get feedback on, and hopefully something that can be worked through with iOS in the future. We as a configuration did enforce security PIN to access the device, so folks on their personal devices tend to not have security pins, although they should these days. We enforce a security pin because while there is an email content on the phone, there is email headers, and generally you could run through potentially some email titles to understand what's going on, or if a certain sensitive information like a deal was going on. The other thing not a lot, aren't happy about is using their personal plans to do corporate activity, period. So that's in the case where it might be mandated that they aren't that happy. But again, that's far and few between, but I'm just highlighting it because it did come up. The LetMobile application does force you to manually update your corporate password in LetMobile. It's not synchronized with Active Directory. LetMobile has already deployed enhancements to make that easier in the application, and we're also working with them to on a systemic change that would allow the LetMobile gateway to synchronize with Active Directory and automatically update that to take that out of the user's hands. So that's another example where LetMobile's been a great partner and open to things that make the product better and actually quite differentiate it from anything else on the market in my mind. Lastly, the LetMobile platform was working so good, users are like, now I need Microsoft Lync, which is our instant messaging solution on the phone as well. And one thing at a time for us, we're working to enable that, and LetMobile's also working to deploy secure application support into their product as well. So we're looking to get on as a design partner with LetMobile to help them test out that solution and make sure it meets the mark for folks. So at this point, I'm going to hand it back to Pam.
Thank you, Steve. was excellent. I really appreciate that, and I hope the audience enjoyed it as much as I did. So based on time, and we're at about 45 minutes in, and we've really had some excellent questions come through, I'd like to take the opportunity to shorten what we were going to talk about, and Steve, if you would be so kind as to go to slide number 29. I'll just briefly sort of summarize the LetMobile value, and then jump right into some of these great questions, because I don't want to miss the opportunity for everyone on the presentation to hear them. So as you've heard Steve talk about, it really is about device independence, give freedom to users to select the endpoint, the mobile endpoint that they're comfortable with, that will make them happy, that will give them a good user experience. At the end of the day, that affects overall total cost of ownership, but we really need to ensure that we're enforcing policies that need to be applied and securing access to corporate data from outside of the device. So one of our design tenets is it is an untrusted device. So protect the data where you need to protect the data, which is not on the device before it gets to the device. So by that, no data or credentials are stored or go to the device. And we really are proud of what we've been able to do with respect to data loss prevention policies, with fine-grained access control, and uniformly enforcing these policies at our gateway. The users, as you've heard from Steve, the feedback has been great. And Steve, like many of our clients, the feedback is very similar, is they like it. They like using their device. They like that they're not giving up control of the device, and they're not concerned that the corporation is watching or stealing or deleting pictures of their last birthday party, whatever that might be. They like the experience, and they continue to enjoy the experience that they purchased for themselves when they made a selection on their mobile endpoint. And ultimately, as a result of users using what they know how to use and the ability to manage data from outside of the device, it's an easy deployment where it's all standard tools and technologies, and it really provides a very low total cost of ownership inside of the organization. And we're thrilled that you joined today. I want to get to some questions. Steve, you can go ahead to the next slide. And let me we've gotten some good ones. Let me sort of summarize, starting at the top. For you, Steve, did you consider just using ActiveSync and enabling its embedded security features?
Well, I actually thought about it until my technical team filled me in there. It's really not a complete security solution at all. It doesn't offer a number of features that we needed. While it does offer some, like remote wipe, it doesn't allow you to detect jailbroken phones or rooted phones, for instance, and it also doesn't keep data off the device. So they were all major reasons that we didn't go the ActiveSync only route. As I said earlier, in this BYOD world, we do assume that the device is untrusted. So I truly think securing the data is the best direction.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Some other folks were curious about, you had mentioned talking about screening MDM solutions. Can you kind of summarize why you found it to not be sufficient to meet your needs?
Yeah, sure. There's a few reasons. They're not robust security solutions as well, and didn't fully meet the some of the key requirements that I laid out there. And the primary one being it doesn't keep data off the phone. So I run into those issues where if sensitive data gets out onto the device, I would have to destroy devices. Right.
Okay, great. Another hot topic seems to be coming in. There's a lot of questions around applications. So, you, of course, have described your experience with the solution for email, but for you as a corporation, do you see the need to allow access to other applications?
I absolutely do. It's really important from an enterprise perspective and is in our roadmap. So a solution that would support that in the future was very important, but my current focus is only on email, calendaring, and that contacts sort of thing. So where LetMobile is right now in their strategy is perfect because they do have application security enhancements to their gateway in the planning right now. So it just worked for me for a timing perspective, knowing they have it in the roadmap, being able to get in early as a partner with LetMobile to be a tester of that was all just worked for me.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Steve. Of course, I'll comment. We are pretty excited about our offering for securing and managing mobile apps. We're going to be announcing that pretty shortly, and certainly we're going to be presenting it in one of our upcoming webinars. But generally, as a timeline for those on the phone who are curious, we're going to be ready for beta customers by the end of this year. So Steve is going to be one of our design partners. There's a couple of other clients that are going to join and be a design partner, and certainly if you want to hear more about it, we're obviously very happy to talk to you about that. So I think that summarizes sort of the key questions that were coming in, and certainly more, and many, we're answering real time and inline. We're happy to certainly have independent conversations with anyone that might be interested. But I think with that, Steve, you can probably go to the last slide, and I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank everyone for joining. We appreciate that your time is valuable, and I know it's a lot to